Oh, don't you all just love the sound of the words Barack Obama? He was given the John F. Kennedy Award for Profile and Courage Award last week, and his speech was televised, and I wept through the whole thing because look what we're living through right now. But anyway, I digress. I am beyond thrilled to be here. It is one of the great joys of my life to have spent time with magnificent musical artists and managers as part of my career as a federal mediator in the United States. I want to thank John Smith and FIM, the Federation, Ray Hare, my good friend, who will say, now, Allison, don't go talk about that lovey-dovey stuff that you always do. The Quebec Musicians Guild, Luc Fortin, for your hospitality, Alex, wherever you just disappeared to, for your kindness, Benoit Merchuel, for your incredible kindness in helping make the arrangements for me to be here. And again, for all of you in the room, I commend you for what you're doing. The idea of bringing together musicians and managers from around the world every few years to have conversations about the critical importance of this work and how we make sure you continue to succeed. It's a wonderful vision, and it's a testament to your leadership and your thoughtfulness about the future going forward. And I have to say, it's hard to imagine a more important moment for coming together again to bring the creators of symphonic music and opera together, given and to talk about the future of your work and its importance in our societies than right now when we are seeing threats, particularly in my country, about the future of funding for the arts. It is critical that you have the conversations that you're going to have here in these 2 days, and I am delighted to be able to join you to exchange information about financing and developing audiences and digital media, as Ray mentioned, and how you get properly reimbursed for what you bring to it. And then again, the government support issue, which is so fundamental. And I just love the idea that there are musicians and managers from Grand Rapids, Michigan to Ghana, where my daughter spent many beautiful months and had a really phenomenal experience. So I'm looking forward to meeting you later. I also want to commend you, John. You mentioned the Oslo call. I actually took another phrase from the call that I thought was particularly important. The quote that says, support for symphony and opera music, which are precious and a fragile part of our cultural heritage, is a prime responsibility of national, regional, and local governments. And I couldn't agree more that it says something fundamentally about the nature of our societies, how we support and nurture and care for our artists. The statement could not be more timely, particularly in my country. We've had threats to arts funding in the past. I don't know that we've had one quite as serious. We're in a kind of a twilight zone, I feel, of precariousness in our country. And so finally, I want to offer special greetings to all of the wonderful Canadians in this room. I apologize. I should have studied French longer and better, that I cannot greet you in your language here in Montreal. But thank you especially for not building a wall to keep the Americans out yet. Now, you might want to reconsider, because given the constitutional crisis that we're currently experiencing with the sacking of our FBI director, who is in charge of the investigation into our president, it's all quite surreal. You may need to start building that wall. In fact, I was telling Benoit this morning that my husband said to me when I left yesterday, if he declares martial law, you know, you really ought to stay in Canada. And I said, oh, believe me, honey, I'm staying in Canada. Good luck to you. So I want you to know in all seriousness that most of us in America want to move to Canada, not just because of our particularly appalling political situation. And now that I'm not a government official, I'm free to say whatever I want, which is really quite lovely. And we don't want to move here, not even because of your utterly charming prime minister, who I will confess we are all in love with in our country. He's sort of irresistible. But it's really, in seriousness, because of your country's history of steadfast moral character, a compass that is always true north, your common decency, and your ongoing support for workers' rights. These are the things that make Canada so special to people like me, and the things that make us want to move here. You know, in 2015, your Supreme Court said that there is a constitutional right to collective bargaining. Actually, it was reconfirming the constitutional right to collective bargaining. And your highest court also ruled that the right to strike is an essential part of a meaningful collective bargaining process. In the United States, we don't have a real right to strike because our workers can be permanently replaced, which is a lovely euphemism for being fired when they go on strike. In the US, it took the death last year of a Supreme Court justice to further decimate the collective bargaining rights of public sector workers in our country. Next year, thanks to the machinations of the Conservative Party in our country, we now have a Supreme Court justice who will make sure that that happens. Never mind that President Obama had an unbelievably qualified mainstream candidate to be a Supreme Court justice who was blocked from even having a hearing. Again, unprecedented in our country. And I'm afraid before long in the US, we will have a national right to work for less law, which means that unions will be further weakened and our ability to engage in collective bargaining will be further weakened as well. So I filled out my asylum papers, and I'm hoping that one of you has got to be an asylum lawyer in the room, right? And so I'm hoping that I'm wearing a red dress so you can find me and let me know what I need to do to finish the process. So, all right. So I've spent my entire career dealing with workplace conflict, most of it as an advocate for an American trade union, the Machinists Union, which is also here in Canada. It was an international association of machinists and aerospace workers. And I had a very proud and wonderful career representing workers. But more recently, I joined the Obama administration and became a neutral, which is that lovey-dovey stuff, as Ray refers to. But I've come to believe that the value of bringing parties together and trying to talk and listen to one another to resolve these really profound problems that we're facing in our societies is probably what I should continue doing as I transition out of government service into whatever comes next. As Deputy Director of the FMCS, I did a lot of international work with many of your countries around the world. I worked with the ILO, and I worked with many of the mediation agencies in the English-speaking countries, the UK and Ireland and New Zealand and Australia and South Africa, to try to help solve problems and help the parties be more successful during a very difficult time in all of our economies. And I really tried to help labor unions and labor government officials in developing market economies come up with good systems to solve problems. Because again, when workers and employers can work together and both workers are given the respect and the money and the salaries that they are due, anything is possible, and we know that. And then later, as director of the agency, I really focused our attention on making sure that the agency was restructured and serving the needs of this 21st century economy. We wanted to make sure we could better help meet the challenges that you were all facing, challenges that Ray referred to, globalization, technology, other challenges driven by the very nature of who is an employee in our societies anymore. All around the world, we're all struggling with the concept of casualization and precarious work and contracting out. And it's the focus of major policy debates and a lot of litigation in the U.S. And it's a critically important question as long as your benefits and your rights as a worker are tied to your status as an employee. What you are called is critical. We had one great decision last year in the U.S. where the musicians in a small orchestra in Pennsylvania were determined to be employees. Now, why was that important? Because it meant they were entitled to the benefits of collective bargaining and freedom from discrimination and all sorts of other, compensation as employees. I thought it was particularly interesting in that case that the court said, the court always weighs, well, if you're an employee, the employer must have a lot of control over your work in order to be categorized as an employee. In this case, the court said in an orchestra, the conductor exercises virtually dictatorial control over the manner in which musicians play. And again, I've spent a lot of time in the last 7 years with the musicians and with administrators. And it seems to me that conductors have a lot of power, with the possible exception of your great maestro, who is the ambassador for this conference. And if I can say his name without butchering it, Maestro Yannick Nézet-Séguin. How did I do? Okay. All right. Okay. So across our economies, we're also seeing dramatic changes in the digital revolution, and some people are calling it the fourth industrial revolution. And I think Ray did a wonderful job of talking about this convergence and the kind of disruption that it's causing. Artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, self-driving vehicles, algorithms. This is what we are now facing commonly in our workplaces. Here, I was noticing your taxi cabs have little things on the top, and I thought, oh my goodness, they have self-driving vehicles in Montreal. And then I realized it was just your taxi cabs, but that's going to be a reality for us in the US before very long. And so all of this is highlighting the simple truth that we are entering a period of profound, exponentially increasing possibility and risk, and we need to work together to come out successfully on the other side. Many workers are now experiencing for the first time what you've always experienced, which is this contracted out gig labor. I mean, you are the original gig workers. You've created, an unbelievable depth and historical tradition, even with this kind of precarious work many of you have had to suffer with. And this disruption that we're seeing now is really hitting all other parts of the economy. So everybody is really in your shoes now. And so we have much to learn from each other. And what we were seeing at my agency before the bad thing happened was that there is a lot of disruption. There are many disputes, and people are struggling to understand how to make this work as the economy changes. And so we really worked hard during the period that I was director to restructure and make sure we were doing everything in our power to help you, to help workers, and to help managers navigate these changes and to ensure success for all parties, not just one. And particularly with regard to symphony orchestras and operas, we created a SWAT team of mediators who have experience, knowledge, and a vast amount of history working with symphony orchestras and operas, and they are the team that goes in to help whenever there is a crisis. And believe me, we've had a few crises in the last few years. So what we really have been trying to do with the SWAT team is to make sure that they develop best practices and they take the lessons learned from some of these difficult negotiations to share with others when they arise. And that is really so much of what we did at the agency, and what I still believe is important, is to look at success stories, look at where the parties have made it work, and then figure out how you can apply those lessons to your particular situation. So in the few minutes that I have, which is very few minutes, well, and I hate to stand between you and your coffee, but I'm going to quickly tell you that one of the greatest success stories we've had in the United States of a labor management partnership is the Ford Motor Company and the UAW. I know, it's manufacturing. What does it have to do with you? What it has to do with you was that those parties were coming through in the early 2000s a critical period of difficulty. The company was almost bankrupt. There was a terrible labor relationship. There was a lot of litigation. There was no trust, nothing at all. And they had, on the brink of bankruptcy in the early 2000s, they had one saving grace, one silver lining. They had leaders who recognized that in every crisis, you can find a solution, and you never let, the phrase is actually, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so they turned around their relationship. They created a new method of bargaining, and it was all based on problem solving, respect, transparency, real transparency, managing expectations, managing social media, educating shareholders, and making sure that the executives, the corporate executives at the highest level, were engaged with the workers so that they developed the feeling and the sense of trust and respect. And they also agreed to continue to engage on a regular basis, not just at contract time. So those are like the 5 key points. And they had phenomenal results. The company is incredibly profitable. It is the poster child for cooperation and for success. We had them speak at almost every conference that my agency put on. And they proudly share this experience that they've had. And by the way, Ford was the only company of the auto company of the big 3 that did not take the government bailout during the Great Recession because they had this successful relationship. And they didn't stop. A year before the latest round of negotiations, they recognized that expectations were not being managed. So they came to my agency and said, we need to train all of our negotiating committee jointly, 150 people. We want you to put them through modules and training on how you build trust and respect, collaborative behavior and problem solving, listening skills, something that we all could do better at. Your talk to listening ratio, gentlemen, is sometimes, as I say to my husband, not exactly in balance. Jointly, just saying, the joint collection of facts and data and influence in social media. So I want to quickly now, and I'm going to do it in less than 3 minutes, I want to show you how the lessons from the Ford UAW applied to any number of symphonic music, orchestra, and opera negotiations that we were involved with. Remember, what was at play at the Ford UAW? Huge financial losses, adversarial bargaining, rigid adherence to positions, lots of grievances and litigation, no trust at all. Okay, a few years ago, when I first met Tino and some of the other wonderful people from New York City and the Metropolitan Opera, what was going on? Financial losses, demands for concessions, a rather unhelpful communications strategy, no expectations being managed on, well, I would say mostly on one side. Not your side, Tino. And what turned it around? An independent financial analyst who everybody trusted, who both sides could believe in, who helped bring about a principle of equality of sacrifice and equality in success. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. They set up committees. Committees are meeting. One of them is called the Efficiency Task Force, the ETF. Tino calls it the WTF committee. I won't translate that for you. The jury is out, but at least they're still talking. Right after the Metropolitan Opera, the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra locked out their musicians for the second time in 2 years. A disaster. No trust. Huge concessions being demanded. What turned that around? And we were involved. The head of the umbrella arts organization who controlled the funding came to the table and talked to the musicians. The simple act of human decency and respect, coming to the table and looking the musicians in the eye and listening to what they had to say. It turned things around completely, and they are working well together. They have already fulfilled the endowment campaign and gone over. And we have examples like this all over. Utah Symphony, Utah Opera. I know one of the brothers here from that organization, the Cincinnati Orchestra, the Minnesota Orchestra. My goodness, the poster child of a horrible situation. Look how well they're doing now. And the Cuba trip was a phenomenal success. Chicago Symphony Orchestra working together on healthcare costs. And then finally, South Bend Symphony Orchestra, using a new model of bargaining that got them all on the same page on economics. So I will close here and say that, do I think there's more work to do? Of course there is. I'm an optimist, but I'm not an idiot. We did just go through September 30th, Black Friday in the US, where we had Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Fort Worth all on strike at the same time. It was not a pretty picture. But even with these recent setbacks, I am convinced that you are setting the most important example, which is bringing everybody together to talk about the issues, to work together, to struggle through the problems, but to do it respectfully and thoughtfully in an open and honest way. We call it, if you want to succeed, we say a good labor management relationship is a port in your storm. If you have a problem-solving mindset, open communications, respect, trust, and transparency, you can do anything. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be with you.